At the start of this World Cup, Australia had fielders in very defensive positions. It was clear that compared to other teams, they were not putting pressure on. They were playing a slightly old-fashioned version of ODI cricket, allowing for agreed-upon singles. By the finals, the most notable thing was how far their ring fielders had moved in. They were diving and scrambling to stop even the simplest push. If you wanted to run from Australia, you had to take some kind of risk against them. And when it comes to Pat Cummins, there was something else, because he was now bowling off spin at 80 miles per hour. He had tried that earlier in the tournament, and to be honest, it hadn't really worked all that well. But it needs the right kind of wicket, and in the final, that is what he got. If the idea was to help India with that pitch, weirdly, what it actually did was bring Pat Cummins finally into form. He had struggled taking wickets with the newish ball, he hadn't got batters in trouble with the short one enough, and wasn't impactful at the death. His slower ball was the key. But what he did with it here was really interesting. He set up a 5-person leg side field and bowled at leg stump. So when you see this wicket of Virat Kohli, what you are actually seeing is a player trying to guide the ball to the offside because the leg side was blocked. This is no different than someone trying to cut an off spinner. And that is why the ball ended up on the stumps. There is no way that Virat Kohli thought he was going to be facing a field or style of bowling like this in the final. And the truth is that a lot of things happened in this game that India were not prepared for. They had been carried through this tournament like a prince in a Disney movie by their own form and the fact that they were just better than everyone else. So then, how did India lose the World Cup final? And the most obvious answer is that they are chokers. But a bit like how I fought back against using that term for South Africa, mostly because it's reductive, it doesn't get you very far, there is a lot more to it. But you cannot get past the fact that India lost this game. They might very much be the greatest ODI team ever to lose a World Cup. This probably depends on how you feel about South Africa in 99 or the West Indies of 83. But if we remove the choking narrative, the most logical reason for them losing is the Evan Gulbis effect. So the question is, did this little known quirk of limited overs cricket bring down perhaps the biggest juggernaut we have seen in ODI cricket in 16 years? Or is there a little bit more to it than that? So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. Evan Gulbis was a bits and pieces all-rounder from Victoria who, over an 8-year career, played around 100 professional matches, mostly in T20. He was not a star, he was a fringe role player who had 3 decent skills. He could hold a bat, usually a number 7 or a number 8. He could deliver pretty fast for what was really more of a 5th bowler, maybe even sometimes a 6th bowler, and he was a good outfielder. The Melbourne Stars once described him to me as a 3-tool player, but all of his skills were too blunt to make a big impact. And in Gulbis' last game, he did not bat or bowl. Melbourne Stars used Stoinis and Maxwell as their combined 5th bowler, so even though the Stars used 6 guys with the ball in that game, there was still no Gulbis. But they chased down that total easy enough, 4 wickets down, so he was listed at number 8 and did not bat. This game was a semi-final, meaning that next the Stars would play in the final. Gulbis was not picked. In the big game, Jackson Bird came in as a bowler, and he took 2 wickets to get the Stars ahead. They stayed ahead in that game all the way through until Stoinis and Ben Dunk put on a big partnership. Win predictors thought they were all but home. But they were batting a little bit slow. You don't really expect Ben Dunk or Marcus Stoinis to have strike rates like this when they are making runs. And when they did lose wickets, it ended up in a collapse as the new batters couldn't score quick enough. In the end, the Stars would end up 13 runs short, despite the fact that Adam Zampa, batting at number 8, which is where Gulbis would have been, made 15 runs from 10 balls. So it actually means that on paper, the bowler who replaced him in that game took wickets, and the guy who batted in his spot made some runs. So why am I going on about Evan Gulbis not being in that final? Well, for certain players, especially in must-win matches, the problem is that they will look at the batting list and see someone who can't bat at number 7 or number 8, and then they slow down, consciously or not. Earlier in that season, the Stars had a batter, Nick Larkin, batting at number 8. Such was their all-round depth. They also had Liam Plunkett there a few times as well. He has 3 first-class hundreds, right? But other games they had Zampa and Bird in that position. But in a must-win game, when their top order looked at who was to come, they didn't see as much batting depth. Maxwell later admitted that they should have gone harder at the start, but Stoinis and Dunk had an aging Bravo at 7 and Zampa at 8. They probably thought with Maxwell, Hanscom and Bravo behind them that those guys could catch up if they got a little bit behind, but they never did. Shardul Thakur started this World Cup in the Evan Gulbis role. Hardik Pandya's injury meant that they pivoted to 5 frontline bowlers, and because 4 of their specialists can't bat, that meant they had a near vacant number 8 spot. And this is Virat Kohli's strike rate in the World Cup when Shardul played and when he didn't. Is this conclusive? Not at all. It's from a small sample size, but it is fun. In fact, this is India with and without Shardul in this World Cup. They averaged more when he was in the team, so maybe that is part of the reason why they batted slower without him. But I would also suggest that it is because their middle order knew that they had to be more careful. While a lot of Indian fans have been talking about them choking for a long time, if you go back through my work, you'll see that my theory has been that they don't choke. It's that they go defensive in knockout games with bat and ball. And I'm not the only one to note this. England used that fact to beat India in the last T20 World Cup, essentially admitting that they just allowed India to go at their own pace. And part of Australia's plan in this World Cup final, according to Bharat Sundaresan, was to get KL Rahul and Virat Kohli in together. Why those two? Because they would naturally slow down. Rohit was trying to bat as fast as he could all the way through the tournament. That was not going to change. Shubman Gill scores at more than a run a ball just naturally. Not an easy guy to slow down. And Shreyas Iyer scores so quickly off spinners that he doesn't really slow down a lot in ODI cricket. But there's more as well, because Virat had slowed down against South Africa earlier on. He said at the change of innings in that match, it was because of the shallow batting lineup that India had. He essentially said the Gulbis out loud. And you could see how much he slowed down in the middle of that knock, only getting going at the end and then still slowing down for his 100. Against Australia in this final, this is even more stark. Do not pardon that pun. 3 fours on the trot early on, and then really sinks into the innings on a slow surface against good bowling and is more than happy with singles. And I do mean that. This is every non-wide that Virat faced. And you could see that there are only a couple of 2s after his last 4. But also, let me show you where Rohit gets out and then Iyer. So you can see that until this point, outside of a good over for Australia, he had been scoring fine. From then on in, he's all about singles. Now, some of this is just the end of the power play. But even so, you would expect him to look for more than just singles. And of course, if you look at just the overall strike rate, Kohli's actually still looks fine compared to KL Rahul's. But that doesn't account for the massive slowdown that happens at the end of the power play. And of course, partly inspired by those wickets. If you just look at the middle overs, Kohli is still 10 points higher than KL Rahul, but his rate now is just above 70. And in truth, you cannot have 2 batters scoring this slow for 20 overs without the chance for issues later. But of course, we do need to talk about KL Rahul, because this was slow. Now, clearly him and Virat decided this, because they both went at similar speeds after that 3rd wicket. But we also know that no one has to tell KL to slow down. In the IPL, he has defended many of his innings by saying that he can catch up. And he has also admitted publicly a few times that he has slowed down because he hasn't seen depth in his order. Again, saying the Gulbis out loud. This innings, he went very slow from the start. Now, part of that was them thinking that they had to rebuild. No doubt that this was on purpose, at least for a while. Then KL just gets stuck. From overs 18 to 23, when he was already set, he almost stopped scoring. And sometimes you get a couple of bowlers who pair up to freeze the game. But this was actually part of Australia's other plan. They knew that not only would India slow down with this pair, but that these two would try and bat on autopilot. And so the idea was to change bowlers as much as possible so they never felt that comfortable. In this period from the 16th until the 25th over, Australia used Zampa, Cummins, Maxwell, Hazlewood, Marsh, Hazlewood, Head, Stark, Marsh and Maxwell. 10 overs, 7 bowlers, and not a single over at more than a run a ball. The pitch obviously helped in all of this because it was not easy to bat on for that first innings. But remember that India was planning on batting first anyway, and most people assumed that Australia would too. The Aussies completely flipped the script and again showed great thinking. But the truth is that none of that would mean all that much if KL Rahul and Virat Kohli had gone on to make hundreds. Especially considering how Australia had been bowling in the tournament. Only Zampa and Maxwell had been above par. Hazlewood had been fine, but nowhere near the force of some of the other informed bowlers. Cummins and Stark had mostly been horrible. This was the first game that all of Australia's frontliners and also their 3 support acts bowled pretty well. What a time to get that right. We could talk about the pitch and the bowlers, but it would be hard to say that India didn't play a part. In the 37th over, KL Rahul faced 5 balls from Glenn Maxwell for 1 run. He was well set, facing a 5th bowling option who usually needed backup in the 37th over with 5 wickets in hand, and he couldn't even get singles. That shows how stuck he got. But all of his numbers were down, so clearly the pitch was playing a part here. But that doesn't stop the fact that Kohli and KL did not put any pressure back on Australia. And clearly these two players sometimes bat too slow. But they are also incredible run scorers, at least in part because of that. Put it this way, 245 players have 2,000 runs in ODI cricket. 10 of them average more than 50, and 2 of them were set at the crease in the World Cup final for India. It was perfectly reasonable for India to believe that one of these guys would go on to make a big score, because they almost always do. The fact that neither kicked on, and you could also throw Rohit in there as well, is just a very strange thing to happen at Indian cricket. In the last 4 years, India played 74 ODIs, and on 73 occasions, one of their batters went beyond 75 runs. I know that was confusing because I basically said 73, 74, 75. But essentially, India averaged one batter scoring more than 75 runs per ODI in the last 4 years. Now, obviously, not all games India even make enough for one player to make over 75, and in some games, multiple players will do that. But the point is, when you looked at batting averages, they had the highest scoring team ever in the history of cricket. And in the one game they needed a single player to go big, no one passed 70. And something else weird happened in this game. For the first time in this World Cup, India changed their batting order. Hardik and Sky had been their number 6, but they didn't back Sky to bat higher up when the pressure was on. Now, if Hardik was fit, this probably wouldn't have been an issue. But while I understand the idea of keeping Sky to come in later, I also think that Jadeja is really good later in the innings as well. And by sending him up the order, you're actually not putting any pressure back on Australia. Put it this way, in the same situation, there is no way that Maxwell wouldn't have come in to bat next. Having a player like Jadeja is a wonderful thing, and every team in the world would ink him into their side almost first choice, especially for a World Cup inside India. But if you are a number 7 batter, even as one of the best to ever do it, it means that you are flawed. You're not a perfect batter. And Jadeja cannot score in the middle. So when he is promoted, India must know that he is not going to change the scoring rate here. Part of the reason he struggles is that he doesn't like to attack spin more. So on a wicket where that was going to be tough anyway, he was likely to get stuck. You can see similar patterns for him in T20, where Chennai often hold him back as long as they can. So India sent out a defensive option on a tough pitch with fielders hunting him, and he struck at 40. They could have sent in Sky to put pressure back on Australia, hope he lasted 10 overs, and then sent Jadeja out to bat where he is at his best. That means they would have ended up with 2 aggressive options. Instead, they chose defensive, and they got stuck even worse. But that wasn't even the only major conservative decision they made in this game. All tournament long, Siraj had been bowling with the new ball. But when India failed to set a decent total against Australia, they did not use him up front. So Shami got the new ball and looked like he wasn't actually sure what to do with it as he'd been bowling first change. But the real issue is that it took away from Siraj's superpowers. India essentially went from having 5 strike bowlers to 4, in a game where they needed all of them. Again, as I said, another defensive option. And again, it did not work. In this tournament, I was waiting for India to get defensive with the bat all the way through. And to be fair, Rohit led from the front and tried to get them to be as attacking as possible. But when it comes to picking his bowlers or his batting order, he was not as fearless as he was with the bat in his hand. But something else happened to India that, to be fair, they may not have factored in. The Australians got reverse swing. That didn't happen all that much for teams in this World Cup. And certainly less for Australia, since they were caught with something that you pick up at a hardware store. But KL and Jadeja were both dismissed by reverse. And Australia were not only helped by the fact that they got the ball to move, but also that the pitch was hard to score on. And so the Indians couldn't really counter-attack them at that point because they were worried about the pitch and their wickets, which just made them sitting ducks for great bowlers. Weirdly enough, one thing actually kind of fell a little bit for India here, even if they played a part in it. Sky came out to bat in the 36th over, which is more or less where you would actually want him to come out. So India got that part right, even if it was from a defensive move. But the issue was, he couldn't score. He was well off his normal rate. This tells us a little bit about all those other players who were scoring slow. Clearly the pitch, plus the bowling and fielding of Australia, played a huge part in why the Indians couldn't get the ball away. Sky played 7 attacking shots by my count. He scored a single boundary from those. That seemed off to me, so I wanted to look in T20 cricket how often he scores a boundary when he's playing attacking shots. Every 1.55 balls, which is why he's almost impossible to bowl to. But even though he hasn't been as good in ODIs, he still usually hits a boundary around 50% of the time, every 2 balls. You don't need to be good at maths to work out that 1 in 7 is a long way from 50%. I think this is one of the best examples we have of the wicket being the main culprit, meaning that Australia winning the toss and bowling was even better than anyone could have imagined. But we also knew that Australia's conditions would be different. They would be better and worse. The better was clear. Look at all the games before the finals, and wickets were going at twice the rate in the second innings compared to the first. You could see that with just the timing of the Australian players. The ball was just coming on in a way it simply was not doing in the first innings. In fact, only England lost when batting second, and they basically don't count as a batting unit. The game was obviously different, because the Indians were bowling with statistically the greatest strike bowling lineup ever. And the ball certainly did hop around a little bit in the dark. And this was India's only chance. All they needed was one ball to get through head, and who knows what would have happened in this game. In many ways, this match was like the inverse of the first time these two teams met at this World Cup, where Australia was defending a low total they made on a tricky day pitch, but at that time Marsh dropped Virat, and this time India just could not hit the stumps of Travis Head. Now after that, Head put a lot of pressure back on India, but at that stage the ball was also coming on to the bat a lot better. Yet weirdly, when you look at the combined strike rate of the runs that Head and Marnus made compared to Kohli and KL, the strike rates aren't all that much different. The real difference is that Head went on to make 100. Yes, it was faster and it put a lot of pressure back on India, but neither of the Indians actually did that. Essentially, KL and Virat didn't make enough runs. The speed of the partnership is what we are focusing on, but in truth, it's just as much of a failure that neither of them actually kicked on. Now, maybe they would have batted for longer and still didn't score quick enough. That is possible. But the bigger failure for India was the amount of wickets, not the speed. Because that meant that Australia finally got to India's worst nightmare, their number 8 position. So India didn't just fail to bat quick enough. They also failed to hide their flaw. And it was that double failure that really led to Australia's win. So the Evan Gulbis effect didn't beat India on its own. But what really beat India is a combination of Australia winning the toss, getting the call right, the pitch, Cummins and Stark finally coming good, Virat and KL not kicking on, India actually having to use their number 8, reverse swing being a factor, a pitch that even Sky couldn't hit on, the fact that when Australia batted, the ball came on better, and Travis Head was not bowled and then smashed them everywhere. Think about everything I just said. What are the chances of all of those things happening in one game? 65% of the way through this match, India was still marginally in front. Yet 2 hours later, Australia was holding the World Cup. It wasn't just the Gulbis effect, or choking, or the pitch. A lot of things went wrong for one of the best teams we have ever seen in ODI cricket to not win the World Cup.